Good evening, everyone. I want to make sure everyone's gotten into their seats as we begin. That's great. Well, it's so wonderful to see all of you here. It is my absolute distinct pleasure to welcome you all today, and I thank you for taking the time to come and attend the Faith and Waters Restoration Forum with IPC. Before we begin our program, I'd like to take a few minutes to talk about a small prayer, a Native American prayer that's reflecting Earth Month, and also do an acknowledgement. The name of the prayer is Earth, Teach Me. Earth, teach me quiet as the grasses are still with new light. Earth, teach me suffering as old stones suffer with memory. Earth, teach me humility as blossoms are humble with beginning. Earth, teach me caring as mothers nurture the young. Earth, teach me courage as the tree that stands alone. Earth, teach me limitation as the ant that crawls on the ground. Earth, teach me freedom as the eagle that soars in the sky. Earth, teach me acceptance as the leaves that die each fall. Earth, teach me renewal as the seed that rises in the spring. Earth, teach me to forget myself as melted snow forgets its life. Earth, teach me to remember kindness as dry fields weep with rain. And now for a land acknowledgement. Today, we wish to hold space for reflection on and gratitude for the land upon which we live and the local waters that support and nourish us all. We recognize that this land and these waters were stewarded by many who came before us. For tens and thousands of years, Algonquin-speaking cousins called the shore of the Chesapeake home. Although we have lost many names, we ask you to honor them for their stewardship of these ancient land and waters. Thank you. In the next few slides, I'm going to give you a quick glimpse about IPC's work and our mission. IPC's mission is to inspire and equip people of faith to honor, protect, and restore our shared watershed, forming faithful stewards, caring for sacred waters. To simply put, IPC is a translator and a connector. We bring resources to faith communities. IPC brings resources from local governments and environmental partners. IPC engages congregations in being good caretakers of our shared watershed. We envision a time when faith communities across the Chesapeake honor, care for, and protect the watershed we share so all our communities and future generations may thrive. IPC works in two ways. One, we raise awareness of the power that people of faith have to restore clean water. Second, we offer assistance helping congregations plan, pay for, and install healing projects for their communities, such as rain gardens, tree plantings, and more. Imagine the potential. There are more than 19,000 congregations of faith across the Chesapeake Bay's watershed. What if we came together? How can you join us? You can join us by signing the Partner Congregation Pledge. There are more than 180 congregations that have joined this movement. There are congregations across Maryland, Lower Eastern Shore, and Pennsylvania, taking action to help our waterways clean and our communities healthy. You could also join us for our Faithful Green Leaders training. These trainings help congregations acquire the knowledge, skills, tools, and support needed to lead communities in raising awareness and restoring sacred waters. Our next training is October 2025. With that, I'd like to make a special note of thanks to our primary funder for this event, Live Green Howard. We thank you so much for making this program happen today. I would also like to acknowledge another sponsor, Interfaith Power and Light, who is also a partner and supporter for IPC. Thank you, IPL. I encourage you to reach out to me to learn more about IPC's mission, our next step as we grow further. I'd like to end this by thanking you all again for coming. I have a message, and followed by the message, we have a quick video to give you a visual for the work that Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake did at the Oakland Mills Interfaith Center. My message to you is water resources are one of the vital natural resources for all living things on Earth. humans bear a moral responsibility to preserve and protect the earth. Encouraging greater religious engagement in environmental matters and fostering a deeper appreciation for the profound connections between humans and nature are essential aspects that require immediate attention. And now we will go to the
What I really want to do is leave stuff for my...
Great. Okay. So this video will give you a glimpse into the work that was done by IPC at Oakland Mill Center. I encourage you to come back again to take a tour sometime, but this will be a wonderful visual. And thank you again.
grandchildren's children, and that's what I'm working here for today. We're here to teach kids how to care for the environment and creation.
Showing up for the community and showing up for the Green Team is something that's important to me. I very much believe in it's a tree of life for those who hold fast to it. And it's fantastic to see kids of all ages and parents and children come out and understand what it takes in order to support that.
IPC has really been an inspiration and a wonderful resource for us. One Water Partnership is also, we really rely on them as a resource, as a way to communicate with our congregation as well as with other congregations, and also to inspire us with new ideas. So they've been extremely helpful for us.
I think that's for a lot of people, faith is the grounding both in their own sense of self and allowing you to understand that you're part of something bigger.
We have a Care for Creation theme, which tries to inspire us to care for the earth. It is our common home, no matter what our faith, and it is the planet we all live on.
Thank you again, and I'm going to pass it on to Rachel, who is going to make the next introduction for us. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you, Meenal, for sharing more about IPC's work. At this time, I'd like to introduce Tim Lattimer, Administrator of the Howard County Government's Office of Community Sustainability. Tim Lattimer has worked for 40 years at the intersection of environmental and development issues at levels ranging from local to global. Tim served previously as a career diplomat for 3 decades, where he focused on environmental and economic development issues in overseas postings that included Costa Rica, Panama, Peru, Argentina, and the Philippines, as well as multiple assignments in the State Department's Environmental Bureau, a stint at the U.S. mission to the UN in New York, and a 1-year detail to the U.S. Water Partnership. From 2012 to 2016, he was Deputy Director and Acting Director of the State Department's Climate Change Office, where he was part of the team that concluded the landmark Paris Agreement on Climate Change in 2015. He won the State Department's prestigious 2016 Frank E. Loy Award for Environmental Diplomacy, which cited his extraordinary leadership in bringing environment to the core of U.S. diplomacy and delivering concrete results in the lead-up to the Paris Agreement on climate change. Prior to joining the State Department in 1994, Tim worked as an environmental planner and project manager for 10 years in Southern California. This included managing environmental impact assessments on infrastructure and urban development projects with various planning and engineering firms, as well as the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, the water wholesaler for the region's 18 million people. A resident of Columbia, Maryland, Tim has volunteered in his personal capacity with local advocacy groups to promote stronger climate action. He also served on the environmental transition team that advised Howard County Executive Calvin Ball in late 2018, and as chair of the Columbia Association's Climate Change and Sustainability Advisory Committee, which was from 2018 to 2023. Tim and his wife Deborah are active members of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Columbia, which has an active climate crisis team. Tim earned a BA in economics and an MS in environmental studies, both from California State University, Fullerton. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Tim.
Well, thank you very much for that really kind introduction, and thank you all for being here tonight. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be with all of you. Let's make sure I've got the right stuff here. Here we go. So before I begin, I just wanted to pose a couple of questions to you all. I'm just curious, how many of you are visiting here from outside of Howard County? Wow. Cool. A second question I have is, how many of you have people and or places in your life that you love? Okay, it should be unanimous, hopefully. And how many of you, if those people and or places were under real threat, would do all you can to protect the people and places that you love? Great, thank you. So tonight I'm going to talk just briefly, because I know I'm the warm-up act here for the main event, but I'm going to talk briefly about some of the things that we're doing here in Howard County to tackle the climate crisis. I'll talk a little bit about some of the global and national context, and then wind up with things that I think are imperative for us to be focused on going forward. But first, I also want to recognize the fact that it's really appropriate that we are gathered here at the Interfaith Center of Oakland Mills. Those of you who are from outside this area may not know this, but here in Columbia, we have 3 interfaith centers. We have the Wild Lake Interfaith Center, we have the Owen Brown Interfaith Center, where the Unitarian congregation that I belong to is at, and a lot of my fellow UUs are here this evening, thank you. And we have this one here, the 3 interfaith centers, and that was by intent, that was by design when Columbia was formed back in the mid-1960s. The idea was to bring different faith groups together. So I really love the fact that this is a program sponsored by and organized by the Interfaith Partners of the Chesapeake and IPL, as well as just bringing all the different congregations together. And in the UU tradition that I belong to, we're not a creed-based faith, we have principles. And at the center of all that really is love. And I think that's the one thing that unites practically every faith tradition, right? That love of our fellow human beings and love of creation, of which we are all a part. And that's certainly one of the principles, the 7th principle in the UU tradition of respect for the interdependent web of all life. And so for me, over the years, those values, those principles informed and sustained me through the decades that I was working on these issues internationally. And it was a great honor and a privilege to be able to serve in that capacity. And I'm also really delighted to be working here now at my own community. So I'm really grateful for that. So let's turn a little bit to the local context about climate change here in Howard County. Some of you may remember this big storm back in 2019, a big downpour here. Anyway, this is the kind of thing that we're seeing more of. And what we can expect in Howard County over the coming decades is that we may have 10 times more days that are at temperatures of 95 degrees Fahrenheit or above, and 10 times more days than we've typically had that are at 100 degrees or above. That's sort of on the global heating side of things. But also we're seeing more intense rainfall. In fact, in the northeast part of the United States since 1958, in other words, in my lifetime, the northeast part of the United States has seen a 60% increase in the volume of water that comes down in the most intense downpours in our part of the world. That's really phenomenal. And we know that those of us who are here from Howard County remember, because we've had that experience here. We had several devastating floods, 2011, 2016, again in 2018. The last 2 were 1,000-year floods that occurred 22 months apart, right? And they wiped out Old Ellicott City. And so that really had an impact, I think, not only on our community, but also just on our understanding of the risks that we are facing as a community, because that really put us on the map as an iconic location for having really intense inland flash flooding as a result of these intense downpours. So what are we doing about it here in Howard County? In June of 2023, County Executive Calvin Ball launched the Climate Forward Plan. This is the Climate Forward Climate Action and Resiliency Plan. And we set in that a couple of ambitious goals, one of which is to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 60% by 2030 and to reach net zero by 2045, which is in line with what the science is telling us where we need to be headed. This plan includes a wide variety of implementation actions, strategies, and it's really a whole of government effort that we are trying to promote. We're really trying to promote systems change, the way we deal with our business as a local government. And so we've got a climate sub-cabinet that the county executive appointed, composed of all the department heads to coordinate this effort. And we've got a variety of action teams that are focused on various aspects of the plan. The other thing I wanted to point out, this plan is also community-wide in scope. The first plan the county did back around 2014 was limited only to the emissions that the county government was responsible for. This one is really trying to tackle it at a more holistic level. And we've added and included a focus on equity. We're trying to take equity into consideration with the actions that we're taking with the community. We don't want to leave any part of our community behind as we try to move forward. So just as an example of the kinds of things we are doing, on clean energy, for example, in 2020, the county executive signed the largest solar power purchase agreement in Maryland. We're about 97% complete with the implementation of that. We've done some 18 projects that's generating the equivalent of over half of the electricity that the county government buildings all use. And that's fantastic, and we want to do more of that. But we've also done a number of other things to make our buildings more energy efficient. We've changed out 10,000, I think all of the streetlights basically in Howard County to LEDs. We're also pushing on implementing EV charging. We've got over 100, something like 106. I invite my colleague Alyssa to correct me if I'm wrong. About 106 publicly available EV chargers here in Howard County. We want to do more. Howard County is really running neck and neck now with Montgomery County for leading the state in the percentage of registered vehicles that are EVs. We're also really unique in that we have a curbside food scrap collection program. And we're diverting food waste, hundreds of tons a year of food waste from our landfills and composting that instead of letting it go into the landfill and generate methane, which is a very potent greenhouse gas. And we're also carrying out nature-based solutions. We have a team that's focused on promoting pollinator habitat. Earlier this year, we calculated that we've got now about over 130 registered acres of pollinator habitat in Howard County. That's nearly twice the goal that we set for 2025 of 75 such acres. And I think that's a reflection of the engagement of folks in our own community here. So that's just an example of the kinds of things that we're trying to do. Similarly, on resiliency, we are trying to use nature-based solutions and really focused on what we can do with reducing urban heat islands. Over the last year or two, we have planted some 300 urban street trees in parts of the county that have been heat islands because they lack vegetation. We recently got another grant from the Chesapeake Bay Trust to do another 150, I think, trees. So that's the kind of thing we're trying to do, at least to help advance on resiliency, and also prioritizing stormwater management in what we do. And on that score, even though it is not really a part of this climate action plan, the county is also implementing the Ellicott City Safe and Sound Plan. We have already put into place 2 new stormwater retention basins in the upstream area of Old Ellicott City. And this past year, we began the construction process to begin to bore a tunnel under Old Ellicott City, an 18-foot diameter tunnel about a mile long that will convey floodwater directly to the Patapsco River to try to avoid and really minimize the degree of flooding in the Old Town area. That is the county's largest public works project in its history. I also would say it is our largest investment in climate resiliency. We're talking about a project on the order of about $140 million. For a little county like Howard County, that's a lot. So I invite you to follow along with what we're doing. We have a climate forward dashboard where you can follow along with how we're doing on the various issues that are covered in our plan. So whether you're concerned about energy or transportation, nature-based solutions, ecosystem services, emergency preparedness, et cetera. If you go to that QR code, you can see the kinds of things that we are doing, the kind of progress that we are making. The other thing is, it also has on the dashboard tiles around each of those subjects so you can get more details about the kinds of projects that we're undertaking, the progress that we're making, and most importantly, what you can do. Each of these subject areas has an example or multiple examples of things that we can do as individuals and as members of the community. And again, this is the kind of thing that we hope will be a useful resource for all of you to learn about the kinds of things that you can do to help make a difference. Last October, we published our first annual Climate Forward report on the progress that we're making. And I was pleased to note that we have reduced our greenhouse gas emissions since the base year of 2025 by about 23%. That's about a third of the way toward our goal for 2030. In the period between 2019 and 2022, which was the last year for which we had data, we accelerated the annual rate of reduction from about 1% a year during the preceding decade and a half to about 2.7% per year. That's okay. It's a good step forward, but it's not enough. We need to make more and deeper cuts on greenhouse gas emissions at nearly 5% a year, really 4.7% a year, if we're going to hit our target for 2030. So that means we have to really move from a whole of government effort to making this a whole of community effort. So I'll just kind of close on the local angle by just noting that Howard County has also been acting in many other ways that have been recognized. We've been recognized as an environmental leader on multiple fronts. We were one of the first counties to be enrolled as a Bee City in the Bee City USA program, and that's a reflection of our commitment to trying to promote more pollinator habitat. We were the first county to be ranked as a LEED Platinum. This is by the U.S. Green Building Council, a LEED Platinum status for cities and counties. So that was another badge of honor. I mentioned earlier the largest solar PPA, et cetera. The other thing we recently completed was, just a couple of weeks ago, we finished planting nearly 47,000 trees across about 107 acres here in Howard County. So that's about a 54% increase above the 86,000 trees that have been planted under the current administration of Calvin Ball since 2019. Because he's got a goal for us to reach 50% tree canopy cover by 2030. So we know that we have more of that we want to do, but that was a big leap forward for us, and that was in partnership with the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. They have a mandate to plant 5 million trees in the state of Maryland by 2031, and we've told them we want to get as many of those trees here in Howard County as we possibly can, so we're looking forward to more partnership with them. So, we recognize also that climate change is a global problem and it requires global solutions. And we certainly found an opportunity to have global solutions through the UN Framework Convention process. At the Paris negotiations in 2015, we reached agreement on a platform for international collaboration and cooperation toward the goal that was set in that agreement for maintaining greenhouse gas emissions at a level that would keep us from exceeding a 1.5 degree Celsius increase in global temperatures by the end of this century. And that's about 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit. That's sort of the most ambitious that we have in that agreement. So in 2018, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change produced a special report on what it would take for us to be able to achieve that 1.5 degree goal. And basically what they said was we need to reduce emissions globally by about half by 2030 and reach net zero by mid-century. That's what's helped to inform the county's plan. It's also helped, I think, to inform the state's plan as well. And what that also means is to do that, it's going to require some dramatic transformation of our society, big changes in how we do things, not just our own personal behavioral changes, but systemic changes in how we do our business at local levels, at states, and in the nation. Shortly after that report came out, the UN Secretary General at the time, Antonio Guterres, characterized that as a code red alert for humanity. And that's what prompted a lot of folks to start talking about the 2020s as the decisive decade for climate action. So we're now in that decisive decade, and we have that choice to make. The choice that we have to make is whether we're going to be able to reduce emissions enough to avoid the most catastrophic impacts We've already seen what it's bringing us with the level of global heating that we've seen already. But this is the stage that we're at right now. So, now we're about halfway into this decisive decade. How's it going? Well, let's look at the first half of this decisive decade, right? We rejoined the Paris Agreement after the previous administration had ditched it. We made it a national security priority. The Biden administration also increased the level of ambition that the United States was committed to for greenhouse gas emission reductions over the coming years. And we invested big to help unleash the power of our innovation and our technology. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, two big pieces of legislation that really have spurred great technological progress and really are helping to propel the energy revolution that we are living through right now. Many of you may not realize it, but we are living through an energy revolution. And he boosted international cooperation and put an emphasis on equity, recognizing that we are not going to solve the climate crisis if we don't at the same time address and solve the justice crisis. So, that's halfway into the decisive decade. How's it been going over the last, let's say 73 days? We ditched the Paris Agreement again. We defunded and dismantled environmental agencies, erased climate science and language from federal websites, pulled down climate data from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration website, for example. We're eliminating emission regulations, and we're gutting international cooperation. We have basically just taken USAID, one of the best investments we've ever made in diplomacy. That international assistance has now been wiped away by the current administration in a matter of weeks. And it's really affecting America's well-being. Just last week, Bloomberg News reported that in the first 52 days, the current administration had taken some 82 actions across 20 different federal agencies to gut what we are trying to accomplish on environmental protection and climate action. It is really having an impact on our water quality, our air quality, and basic quality of life, and public safety. So what's the rest of the agenda look like for this current administration? Well, you don't have to take my word for it. You can read Project 2025. The kinds of things they're talking about, besides censoring climate data, launching legal attacks against advocates for climate action, weaponizing the judiciary to thwart state and local climate action, more deregulation for polluters, and trying to expand fossil fuel exports. At a time when we have a real climate crisis, they came in and declared an energy crisis, even though we were already the #1 producer and exporter of fossil fuels in the world. So, not to put too fine a point on it, I was a career diplomat for 30 years, but I'm not going to be diplomatic tonight. What we are witnessing is a coup. A self-coup, nonetheless, but still insidious and damaging. So if you want to save the people and places that you love, right now, the time is now for us to defend democracy, to uphold the rule of law, to stand up for science, and to build community. This is what we can do. And we know that building community is one of the best ways that we can resist fascism, because they want us to feel alone, afraid, and powerless. So now it's on us, working at local levels, to resist the rise of fascism, and building community is a big way of doing that. And one of the best things you can do is, after the presentation tonight that we're all looking forward to, we're going to have some breakout groups by, I think, county or by regions. So I invite you and encourage you to please participate in those breakout groups, because working together at the local level, we can make a real difference. And it's really that whole of community effort that we can undertake at our respective levels to make all the difference in the world. So thank you all, and really grateful for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim. With everything going on in the country and the world right now, it's really wonderful to hear about all the amazing projects and initiatives going on in Howard County. So thank you so much for detailing that as well. Now I'd like to introduce tonight's keynote speaker. We are thrilled to be joined tonight by Dr. Katharine Hayhoe. Katharine Hayhoe is an atmospheric scientist whose research focuses on understanding the impacts of climate change on people and the planet. She is the chief scientist for the Nature Conservancy and a Horn Distinguished Professor and endowed Professor of Public Policy and Public Law at Texas Tech University. She is the author of the best-selling book, Saving Us, A Climate Scientist's Case for Hope and Healing in a Divided World. She also hosts the PBS digital series Global Weirding and is a co-founder of Science Moms. She has been named to lists including the Time 100 Most Influential People and Fortune 50's World's Greatest Leaders, and is a United Nations champion of the Earth in science and innovation. Ladies and gentlemen, Katharine Hayhoe.
Thank you, everybody. 1 second as I connect everything here. There we go. And one more here. Okay. Well, honestly, that was not the opening act. That was the conclusion, right? That was such a perfect encapsulation of how a global issue can be addressed locally, and how at the local level, it's not just what you do, it's how you do it that matters. Everybody has a role to play. And when I think about this issue, we talked a little bit about this, but I want to dive a little bit more into the question of values. I love that this was the title, Living Our Values. And I have to tell you that before I first started this work, a long time ago, I did not see how my values were relevant to the things that we're talking about tonight. I didn't. I respected environmentalists, and if you look at the definition of an environmentalist, and actually, let me tell you now too, I'll have a bit of time for questions at the end before you go into your discussion groups. So if you think you might want to ask me a question at any point, you can take out your phone, you can turn off the ringer if you haven't already. You can take a picture of this QR code, or if you want to type it in, pollev.com/Katharine, but you have to spell Katharine with 2 A's. So trust me, the phone's easier. And when you go there, I will do this myself. Make sure it's working, yes. When you go there, you will be able to write your question at any time. It will look like this. And the fun part is you can see everybody else's questions and you can upvote the ones you most like. I know from experience I won't be able to get to all of them because I know you'll have a lot of questions. So I will remind you as we go along, don't forget to put your questions in here, and I will also remind you to upvote the ones you're most interested in. So has everybody got it now? I see a few people still working on it. Well, I'm not going to wait for everybody. If it doesn't work for you, just ask your neighbor. Ask your neighbor to put your question into their phone. And when you, like I said, when you go there, you'll see questions. And the first question is actually there. I'll go ahead and answer this. The first question is, what's your favorite tree? Well, I'm Canadian, so what do you think the answer is? It is clearly a maple tree, and I grew up with actually tapping maple trees. In spring, you tap them, you get the sugar, you boil it down, and then you spread it out on the snow, and it hardens, and then you eat it. So maple trees are definitely my favorite type of tree. I'm glad somebody figured out how to do this already. Okay, and a bunch of you are, yep, okay, we're looking good, and some people have answered theirs, too. Okay, so you can do this at any point, and the questions are sort of appearing like that. But I want to get back to what I was talking about with values. So an environmentalist is defined, according to the Google Dictionary, as a person who is concerned with or advocates for the protection of the environment. And, you know, growing up, I loved spending time outdoors, but I thought that environmentalists were people who hugged trees and made documentaries, and I watched those documentaries and I wished them well, but I didn't really see myself as that type of person. It didn't seem like that was my value. And when you click on the secondary definition that they have here, you know, conservationist, preservationist, ecologist, green, nature lover, those are all positive things. And then you look at the second row. Eco-activist, eco-nut, eco-freak. We start to be like, oh, maybe not. And then when you Google things, it often gives you pictures. And so when I Googled environmentalist, these are the pictures that showed up. So what does this tell us about who our society perceives environmentalists to be? Obviously, we perceive them to be 100% white, right? We perceive them to be all but one male. Rachel Carson is the only woman here. We perceive them to be mostly dead. I am happy to report that Bill McKibben and Al Gore are not dead. Bill just emailed me the other day, and I have to email him back. But I'm pretty sure everybody else on this list is dead. And if you look at this list, how many people have we got here? We've got 8 people here. Oh, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 of them are heavily bearded. So our society is telling us that environmentalists are all white, mostly men, likely dead, and have really large beards. And I'm white, but I'm nothing else on that list. So no surprise, I didn't really see myself as an environmentalist. And in fact, there was a really good Grist article that described the problem. The problem is that environmentalism has been successfully cast as a fringe concern rather than the basic universal right of every man, woman, and child to have safe and healthy air, water, food, land, sea, and natural places, not to mention economies based on security and sustainability rather than corporate profit and destruction. Again, I could probably stop here, right? So the point is that we are growing up in a society where our values are not connected to this issue. In fact, we are taught, as I was, that my values were not connected to this issue. Isn't that ridiculous? But if you think of this, who doesn't want safe and healthy air? Who doesn't want water and food? Who doesn't want an economy based on security and sustainability? Most of us want these things, yet we've been convinced that our values are not compatible and consistent with them. Isn't that ridiculous? So, when I was in university, I ended up sort of accidentally taking a class on climate change. Not totally accidentally, but I needed a breadth requirement, and my friends were taking geology, and I didn't think rocks were interesting at the time. I've since learned otherwise, just to be clear. So I ended up in this class on climate change, and that started my journey in understanding how my values did connect with this issue, and in fact, how my values connected so closely that it ended up changing the entire trajectory of my career. I was planning to be an astrophysicist, which means by definition I'd be studying everything that has nothing to do with this Earth. And instead, I am a climate scientist, and I spend every day thinking about this Earth and our interactions with it. So my journey began by realizing that, first of all, our world population has increased significantly. I don't know if you saw the headlines. We passed 8 billion already. A recent headline said, we've been undercounting rural populations, so we're already at 11 billion. I don't know if you saw that headline. But the number one reason why our population has increased is also because our life expectancy has increased, is because of the way that we've been getting energy from fossil fuels. So think about this. This is pretty stunning. If you were born 200 years ago in the UK, which at that time was one of the most developed countries in the world 200 years ago, if you were born 200 years ago in the UK, your life expectancy at birth was 40 years. Now, I won't ask for a show of hands, but I will acknowledge that I'm on the wrong side of that line. So most of us in this room, at least 2/3 of us in this room, I'm going to guess, would probably be dead if we were born 200 years ago. That's pretty wild when you think about it. So our average lifespan has doubled in the last 200 years, and the number one reason it has doubled is because we have figured out how to get energy out of the ground instead of out of humans and animals. And thanks to the Industrial Revolution, we are now able to refrigerate our food. What does that mean? Has anybody ever lived without a refrigerator? Yep, I've done a bit of that myself. It is a long, painstaking process to have to get the food, to eat the food, to prepare the food, to then go get it again, because you can't store anything. Imagine living without electricity. You've probably lived without electricity a little bit, but when you live without electricity for long periods of time, our society isn't built for that. Electricity enables us to study at night, to walk around safely at night. Imagine our mobility to see the world, to connect with people. Imagine the medical advances that have happened over the last 2,000 years. I mean, I myself know that if it were not for those medical advances, I wouldn't have lived to 40. I'd be dead at the age of 2, I think. Pretty sure. So our lives have improved in innumerable ways over the last 200 years, thanks to how we get energy. And research shows very clearly that around the world, energy, specifically electricity, is most highly correlated with human well-being. It is highly correlated with health, with welfare, with ability to be educated. It's correlated with all of the things that are important to our lives. And so when we see that the number of people without electricity is going down, the red is without access, the blue is with access, that's good news. It improves health, it alleviates poverty, it fosters living standards and economic growth. And when you look at where the people are who are living without electricity, they're living in some of the poorest countries in the world with the shortest lifespans. So what am I doing here? I'm talking about values, but I'm talking about them in a totally different way. I mean, don't we, don't you, don't I think it's a good thing to alleviate poverty? To ensure that people live longer, that they have healthier lives and better lives? It is. But all of this was based on an assumption that we hardly ever think about. And it's going to sound crazy to say this, but our entire economic system was built for a flat earth. Did you know that our whole economic system is basically a flat earth system? What do I mean by that? I mean, our whole economic system, which was designed in the early 1800s, the whole idea of an economy in the field of economics is only about 200 years old, although, of course, we've been bartering and exchanging, and we've had money for a lot longer than that. But the whole field of economics is based on the assumption that if we need more resources, there's always more resources to go get from somewhere. And if we produce pollution or waste or garbage or heat-trapping gases, there's always somewhere to put it where it won't bother us. Because our economy does not assign a value to either the inputs or the outputs. Now, what is the value of nature? It's almost impossible to value it because it provides everything for us. Just think about this for a second. If humans disappeared off the face of the earth, what would happen to nature? It'd be fine. Probably better than fine. Now, if all living things other than humans disappeared off the face of the earth, what would happen to us? Yeah, we'd maybe have a couple of days left, and that'd be it, right? So how do you put a value on what actually sustains every breath we take? How do you put a value on that? So in our economic system, they just didn't. There is no value on these things. And there is no value on the pollution that comes out the other end. And so because our economic system fails to incorporate the values on which our life depends, that is how we have ended up in this situation where our average lives would require 5 planets if everybody lived the same way as us. 5 planets. Australia's number 2 at 4.5, Russia's next at 3 planets, Germany 3 also. And then, of course, down at the bottom, you have countries like Yemen, where if everybody lived like Yemen, we would only be using a 20th of the planet. So as a result of failing to incorporate values into our economic system, we have created a series of crises because our world is not flat and infinite, it is round. It is finite. There is a limited amount of resources to go in, and when we produce pollution, when we use land unsustainably, when we produce heat-trapping gases, they affect us. They don't just go somewhere far away. So as a result of failing to incorporate values into our economic system, we have problems like pollution that kills over 9 million people prematurely a year. Now, if you'd like a comparison for that, according to the World Health Organization, they have been tracking the number of people who have died from COVID since the beginning of the pandemic. Now, the WHO numbers are obviously an underestimate. There's a lot of people who didn't register, they didn't track them, so on and so forth. But according to the latest World Health Organization estimates, less people have died from COVID since the beginning of the pandemic than die from pollution every year. Yet, who in the world knows about people dying from COVID? Pretty much everybody, right? Everybody knows about that. Who in the world knows that more people die every year from pollution? Almost nobody. We don't know this. It's about 3 times the death burden of malaria, AIDS, and tuberculosis combined, and developing countries are particularly affected. What else have we done besides pollution? Well, we see pollution actually right here, right? We see it right here in Chesapeake. So I talked about pollution, you might think pollution in China or pollution in India. Well, right here, there's nearly 100 coal ash dumps into the Chesapeake Bay watershed, and air sources, air pollution, contributes to about 1/3 of the total nitrogen deposited into the bay. So pollution is an issue here too. Then what about loss of nature, or what we call the biodiversity crisis? Well, we know that insect populations are crashing. We know, this is one of the first bee counties, you were saying? We know that bees and pollinators are at risk. We know that around the world, large numbers of animals, some of which we can't even track, their populations are decreasing because of our unsustainable land use. You know that of the oxygen we breathe, almost 70% of it comes from tiny phytoplankton or giant kelp in the ocean. And the rest of it comes from trees. So literally, the air we breathe comes from nature. We know that as biodiversity loss occurs, it affects us too. You've probably heard how across the US, there's this white nose fungus that's spreading on bats, and it's killing bat populations. A study last year looked at what happens when the bat populations are wiped out in farming communities. And they found that the bats eat the insects. So if the bats are not around, then the farmers have to use more pesticides to get the same amount of prevention. And as you use more pesticides, it pollutes more. And they actually found over 1,000 infant deaths attributable to increased pesticide use. There is an intimate connection between the health of nature and our health. Whose values are not engaged here, right? But if you just go up to somebody in the street and you said, what about the bats? They'd say, oh dear, so sad, right? They wouldn't make the connection to their baby or their grandchild. We have failed to connect the values. And of course, we have biodiversity issues right here. Warming water threatens aquatic life in the Chesapeake Bay region. Other fish species declined after other species arrived. Mussels, of course, are really important in cleaning and filtering water that's polluted, and they're also at risk. So we've got pollution, we've got the biodiversity loss or loss of nature, and then we've got climate change on top of it. And all of these are crises, but they are crises that are symptoms. They're symptoms of the same thing. They're symptoms of the fact that we have not used our values to inform our societal system. Our values have not been plugged in to inform what we do. And so because of that lack of connection between our values and the way we operate as a society, we've created all of these crises that are all symptoms of that unsustainable use of resources and failure to value what really matters to us in life. So what is climate change? Well, climate change is really easy to explain. I can explain it to you in 30 seconds and 4 cartoons. And then you can too after this. So our planet has a natural blanket of heat-trapping gases that keeps us the perfect temperature for life. The sun's energy shines down and it goes right through this blanket like a window. The earth absorbs the sun's energy and it gives off heat energy. And just like a blanket does on a cold night, traps your body heat, this blanket of heat-trapping gases traps the earth's heat and keeps us at just the right temperature for life. So if this blanket is natural, which it is, and if it's essential to life, which it is, we'd be a frozen ball of ice if it weren't for this blanket, what's the problem? The problem is that by digging up and burning coal and gas and oil, we are producing an extra blanket that our planet never needed. And just like you would if someone snuck into your room at night and put an extra blanket on you, and you wake up sweating saying, hey, I didn't need this, that's what we're doing to our planet, and that's why it's running a fever. Now, people often refer to this issue as global warming because we scientists track the average temperature of the planet in response to this extra blanket we're wrapping around it. But I often refer to it as global weirding. Because wherever we live, the weather's getting weirder. A number of years ago, I was standing in line after church to pick up my son from Sunday school, and the guy in front of me said, do you mind if I ask you a question? I said, well, sure, it's not like we're going anywhere. And so he said, do you feel like the weather has gotten weirder? Now, just for context, this was in Lubbock, Texas, which 2 years before had won the Weather Channel competition for the wildest weather in the country. We had beat out Fargo, North Dakota, and Caribou, Maine for the title of the weirdest weather. But despite that, he had lived there himself all his life, and he could still tell something was different. So I said, yeah, when you think about it, it's like wherever we live, we have a pair of weather dice, and we always have a chance of rolling a double six naturally, a heat wave, a flood, a drought, a wildfire, a storm. But as the world warms, decade by decade, it's taking one of these numbers and then another and replacing it with sixes or even a 7. And so as a result, we've always had heat waves, but the heat waves are getting more frequent and they're getting stronger. We have always had wildfires, and most of the wildfires in the lower 48 states are the result of accidental human ignition, power lines sparking, people dumping burning trash into the dry brush. But imagine accidentally dropping a match into a pile of wet green wood versus accidentally dropping it into a pile of bone-dry kindling. That's the difference with climate change. Bigger fires, much more dangerous fires. Droughts are normal and natural, but they're lasting longer and they're much more intense. Hurricanes are normal, but the season is getting longer. They're just sweeping up a lot more water vapor, and they're much stronger than they used to be. The same goes for the atmospheric rivers that hit the West Coast. And heavy rainfall is increasing, as you know, right here in Maryland, right? Why? Because warmer air holds more water vapor. So when a storm comes along, there's more water vapor for it to sweep up and dump on us than there was 50 or 100 years ago. In the US, there was $1 billion plus climate or weather event on average every 4 months in the 1980s. So about every 3 months, about 3 a year. Accounting for how the value of the dollar has changed over time, by the 2010s, there was one every 2.8 weeks. And now there's one every 2 weeks. So I said to that man, yeah, the weather is getting weirder. You're right, that's the way to describe it. And he said, I knew it. He said, I've lived here all my life and I knew that something was different. So why does this matter? Pollution, loss of nature, changes in climate? They are all symptoms of the same cause, and they all affect the air that we breathe, the water we drink, the food that we eat, the buildings and roads and systems we use that were built for a planet that doesn't exist anymore. That's how fast climate is changing. And of course, the nature that surrounds us, both on land and in the ocean. Now, in my journey to connect the dots between what I cared about and what these issues were, it wasn't only about me. For me, I grew up living in Canada and living in Columbia, South America, not Columbia, Maryland, Columbia with 2 O's. And so growing up there as a child and as a teenager, I saw what happened when floods occurred, when people's homes got wiped away, when they didn't have enough to eat, when you couldn't drink the water. I saw what that looked like. And so for me, when I learned that climate change does affect my life, but it doesn't affect me nearly as much as it affects other people who have done nothing to deserve it, who are living much lower carbon lifestyles than me, I realized that's not fair. And for me, one of my core values is that fair? And it was not. So what we're seeing is that as the world becomes more globalized, what used to be differences between rich countries and poor countries has now simply become differences between rich people and poor people in the same country, in the same county, in the same city. The poorest 50% of the world produces 7% of emissions. The richest 1% produce twice as much. So a lot of the talks I give, there's somebody sitting in the front row, and I don't think there is somebody here in the front row, but a lot of talks I give, there's somebody in the front row who says, I know why we're having this problem. It's because we have too many people on the planet. And if their brain is not connected to their mouth, they will continue and they will say, it's all of the women in poor countries having too many babies. I'm sorry to say I get that about once a week. Now, I don't know if there's anybody here who watches the Avenger movies, but there was a series of Avenger movies that were all about these gems that they were collecting. And it turned out at the end, they were being collected by this giant purple guy called Thanos, who had this special golden glove, who he put all the gems into the glove, and then he could snap his fingers and make something happen. And when he had laboriously collected these gems over multiple Marvel movies, he put them in the glove and he snapped his fingers, and what did he do? He got rid of half of the living things in the universe because he had decided the universe was overpopulated. If you were going to Thanos the Earth, and climate change is actually starting to do a pretty good job of that, as is pollution, 9 million people a year, and biodiversity loss, who is disproportionately impacted? It's the people who've done the least to cause the problem. 50% of the poorest people could disappear off the face of the earth, and that would make a dent in climate change of 7%. It is not the number of people, it is how we live. It's our value system, it's our economy. And just to give you an idea, to dig into this just a little bit farther, if you look at who is most vulnerable to climate impacts, it is people who have done the least to cause the problem. It's very tiny font here, so I will read it to you. The first country at the top is Malawi, where the desperation induced by increasing risk of drought and flood is causing some families to make the unthinkable choice of the whole family starving to death or selling a daughter as young as 8 or 10 years old into marriage. Next up, we have Somalia, Eritrea, Niger, Mozambique, Tajikistan. All of these countries have done almost nothing to contribute to the problem. If you look at who's most vulnerable, it's basically the poorest countries are the most vulnerable countries, and they're the countries that have contributed least to this problem. You look at the floods we have here, and then you look at the floods they have in Bangladesh, where a third of the entire country has been underwater multiple times. You look at the hurricanes that hit the US, and then you look at the hurricanes that hit Haiti, where since they already have cholera in the water system, it kicks off a massive cholera epidemic that kills tens of thousands of people. You look at the drought we have in Texas, and then you look at the drought, the same drought that they get in Syria, which before climate change would not even have been a drought. Now, thanks to the warming we've already had, it is an extreme drought, and if we hit 2 degrees C of warming, which is 3.5 Fahrenheit, it would be an exceptional drought. It's enough to trigger and exacerbate refugee crises. Since the 1960s, the gap between the richest and poorest people in the world has already increased by 25%. And then there's this intergenerational inequity, the fact that the very young and the unborn will bear the brunt of the impacts. So this is a map showing the lifetime exposure of climate impacts to people born in 2020. You can see that the younger you are, the more you're impacted. And obviously the less you contributed because you were just born. It isn't only about differences between countries. It isn't only about differences between people in age. In the same city, they didn't have Columbia, so I've got Baltimore here instead. In the same city, they've shown that poor neighborhoods without green space can be up to 15 degrees Fahrenheit hotter during a heat wave than a high-income city in the same area. The reason is lack of green space, and why do they not have green space is because of historical racist practices in zoning and lending. So you can't address any one of these issues by themselves. They are all interconnected with the way our values have designed the way our society functions. And it's not just about heat. It's about flooding. It's about storms. It's about recovery from storms. Climate change affects us all, but it does not affect us all equally, and that's not fair. People often talk about saving the planet, and I stop them there. Because that tends to dissociate from our lives. The actual fact, I can tell you this as a scientist, the fact is the planet will be orbiting the sun long after we're gone. It will. The question is, will we? That's the question. And when I say we, I do not mean just humans. We cannot survive. We can't float around in outer space without the resources this planet provides. But it's about all of us together, all living things together, remember? If all of nature disappears off the face of the planet, it's just us left, we're done for. It is all of us living things together. And so I increasingly became aware that to care about climate change, you don't have to be a certain type of person. You just have to be a human. If you're a human being living on planet Earth, and so far all of us are, there might be a few people who want to go to Mars, and I say, let them. In fact, we might be better off if they did. But number one, they can't get to Mars without the resources this planet provides. And number two, this is our home. I had the exceptional privilege of attending one of Stephen Hawking's last talks before he died. Stephen Hawking was that very famous cosmologist, physicist who was in a wheelchair, he had Lou Gehrig's disease. At the end of his life, he gave his talks through a box that sort of translated what he was saying into a automated voice. And at the end of his life, he was speaking out very strongly about the threats that climate change poses to human society and civilization. So I was sitting there in the front row of the science conference listening to him deliver his talk and nodding along when he was talking about the existential threat of climate change. And then he said something that just sort of caused my mental record to like screech to a halt. He said, and that's why we have to terraform Mars. I was like, what? I thought to myself, by the time you can actually get enough people to Mars to terraform Mars, climate change is going to overwhelm us. Like, there's just no chance of that. Not to mention who's going to go to Mars, the 1,000 people who have the resources and the ability, leaving everybody else behind. And so the next day at that science conference, I was actually giving my presentation. And I was backstage with, it turned out, Stephen Hawking's colleague. He is not as well known here, but he was in fact the Royal Astronomer of England. So he was quite well known over there. And he was also a fellow of the same college at Cambridge, Trinity College, as Stephen Hawking was. His name is Martin Rees. And so as we were backstage, and turned out we had the same computer, so they were putting different colored tape on our computers to make sure that I gave my talk and he gave his. That would have been pretty fun if I'd been given his talk. I said, do you mind if I ask you a question? And he said, sure, of course. And I said, do you agree with what Stephen Hawking said about having to terraform Mars to deal with climate change? And he gave me this wonderful reply. He said, fixing climate change compared to terraforming Mars is like a dawdle in the park. The amount of effort we have to put into just fixing something that's already incredibly perfect for life is like this compared to terraforming a dry, dusty planet. So that, to me, was really sort of the bottom line. To care about this, you just have to be a human being who calls the planet home. So this is where I started to connect with my values. So what I want to do now is I want to take you through my thought process for my values as a Christian. I recognize not everybody in this room is a Christian. So as I go through my values, I want you to go through yours. I want you to put the pieces together, and this is an interfaith event. So whatever your faith is, I want you to be thinking through your values too. Because as far as I know, every major faith tradition has the values I'm going to be talking about here. If you are not a person of faith, like my colleague Kent, a couple of years ago I was at a science conference, and I typically get a bunch of emails from colleagues ahead of time wanting to meet, and so Kent had sent me an email saying he wanted to have lunch, and we didn't have a project together at the time, but I figured, always happy to talk to him. So I still remember I was meeting him at a Chinese restaurant, and I walked in, and I had not even sat down in my chair before he said, I'm not a person of faith, but I care about climate change too. And I was like, well, of course you do. You've dedicated your life to working on this issue. He said, I'm a humanist, and I believe that it's not fair that the people who have contributed the least to this problem are bearing the brunt of the impacts, and I believe that we need solutions for the well-being of everybody. And he had literally completely pivoted his career to focus on not just the risk, but the solutions. And so I was like, well, of course you care. And so whoever you are, you have the values you need to care. So as I walk through mine, I want you to walk through yours and really think out and articulate to yourself what the values are that you're bringing to this. So as a Christian, I began in the first book of the Bible, chapter 1, where it says, God said, let us make human beings in our image. And this is a verse that most children learn in Sunday school. But I don't know about you, I don't ever remember being taught the second half of the verse. The second half of the verse explains why. There's a why there. And the why is, the Hebrew word is rada, every living thing that moves on the face of the earth. So that is why Christians and Jews believe we were made in God's image. And so rather than translating this word, I'm just going to show you where else it's used in the Bible. And there's a verse in Psalms that talks about God doing this. To what? To deliver the needy when they cry for help, the afflicted and those who have no helper, to have compassion on the poor and needy. That is what this word is used to describe. So if you're going to deliver those who need help and have compassion on the poor and needy, we are asked to apply that concept to every living thing on the face of the earth. That's what the Bible says. So people often in our society, with the values that went into founding our society, take this type of approach to the world. And then to counter that, people often offer this perspective where humans are one of many other living organisms, but not particularly unique in any way. And I often say if dolphins were in charge of the world, I think we'd probably be better off. But dolphins are not. All the animals are being impacted, but they don't know why. We're the only ones who know why. So one of my favorite faith-based organizations is a conservation organization called Aracha. It's Portuguese for the rock, but they work in the US, Canada, and around the world. And their theology director, Dave, actually put together this little theological perspective of what if humans have a responsibility to rada every living thing on the earth. And then if you go to the New Testament, Jesus tells his disciples, people will recognize you by your judgmentalism. And by the fact that you picket places and you show up with signs and you tell everybody where they went wrong. No, that's not what he says. He says people will recognize you if you love one another. That's literally what Jesus says. And then the Apostle Paul goes on and says, walk in love as you have already been loved. And then continues to say the only thing that counts is when our faith expresses itself through love. The Pope, of course, has chimed in You've probably read his encyclicals. There's 2 of them now, if you haven't. The first one was good. The second one, I thought my phone was going to burst into flames when I was reading the second one. This man minces no words. If you want a shot in the arm, I highly recommend the second encyclical. And he talks about how his values connect to these issues that we're talking about here. In Texas, where I live, they put the Bible on road signs. And this is a good one, in my opinion. That love thy neighbor thing, I meant it, sign God. So you're seeing the dots here, right? The dots are connecting pretty clearly. So we often think now that me and everybody I know were worried, and those other people who don't want to talk about it, they're not worried. So what do we have to do? We have to make them worried. But it turns out that most people actually are worried. Did you know in the US, 2/3 of people are worried? 2/3. But you know what percent are activated? 8%. 8% are activated. So why are they not activated? It's really simple. We have all this information in our heads about air pollution, microplastics, biodiversity loss, climate change. We're worried. Most of us are worried. But we have not connected it to our values. We still think of environmentalists as all white, mostly dead, and men with large beards. Nothing against that. And in fact, if you are, well, can't speak to anybody who's dead, but if you're alive and you're a man with a large beard, then you better be an environmentalist. So what do we have to do? We have to help people see who they already are as the perfect person to care. And this is really important because 9 times out of 10, people are like, oh, well, how do we get people to care about nature? How do we get people to care about this or that? And it's like, no, it's not about getting them to care about whatever you care. It's about, like, imagine, for example, if, one of the reasons I care is because I ski. I like snow. So do I have to turn the whole world into a bunch of skiers before they can care about climate change? No, that's ridiculous. Does everybody here have to agree on one faith before we can care about climate change? I don't think so. We just have to help people connect what they already care about, which might be different than what I care about, and help them see who they are as the perfect person to care. But then we also have to help them connect it to their hands, because like I just said, most people are worried, but they don't know what to do. So how do we connect our heart to our hands? It turns out there's something obvious that most of us aren't doing. Really, really obvious. This is a map from the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication. I just realized that this is an older map, but they released new maps that sadly the color hasn't really changed. I think it might be 73% now instead of 72. So this is the number of people who think global warming is happening, but then they ask people, do you think it affects you? And then they ask people, do you ever talk about it? We're not talking about it. And in fact, a study just came out yesterday. The author just sent me a note on Blue Sky today, where they found across the US that a majority of Christian religious leaders accept the reality of climate change, but they never talked about it. In fact, the study found that 90% of Christian leaders in the United States agree that climate is changing and humans are responsible and the impacts are serious. 90%. But they don't talk about it, as you can see here, right? And then the researchers went on and they found something really, really important. They found that when churchgoers learn how 90% of their leaders agree it's real, they report doing something about it. So there's this feedback cycle where we don't talk about it, so nobody thinks we care. And if nobody thinks we care, nobody does anything about it. So this sounds super obvious, but what's the most important thing we can do? Exactly. That's my TED Talk. Literally. You got it. Because if you don't talk about it, why would you care? And if you don't care, why would anybody want to do anything about it? Right? We are social people. when we talk about something, and when I say talk, it could be actually talking, it could be writing, it could be posting, it could be just doing something where someone else sees you do it. That's when we encourage others to act. Now, I want to clear up 2 misconceptions, though, right here, okay? This is where people fall across the spectrum of caring about climate change in the United States. And often when we say we need to talk about it, people are like, aha, now I've got the tools to go tackle Uncle Joe. Or my neighbor, or that person who just keeps posting on Facebook every day about how there's more polar bears now than there ever used to be, and the whole thing's a hoax, and CO2 is plant food. We need to talk about it with everybody but dismissives. Because dismissives are so convinced it isn't real that arguing with them makes it worse. I have a definition of a dismissive. This is my personal definition. Somebody who, if an angel from God with brand new tablets of stone reading global warming is real in foot-high letters of flame appeared to them, they would not change their minds. They wouldn't. So why would 10,000 scientific studies do it? They won't. So most of us have somebody in our life like this. I've only ever met one person who didn't, or who claimed he didn't. I do myself. And my best recommendation was somebody who's dismissive, and you know who they are because they're always bringing it up like a sore tooth, is to say, I'm sorry you're wrong. And if they're your relative, you can say, I love you. I'm sorry you're wrong. Now let's just talk about something else. But by talking about something else, sometimes we can get around it. Like my colleague John, who every time he went home for dinner, his dad would be trotting out the latest hoaxes about climate change, and it irritated John so much that he went back to university and got a PhD in social psychology. I'm not kidding you. He did. He is now the world expert in conspiracy theories and false information related to climate change. I am not kidding. His name is John Cook. He has a YouTube channel called Cranky Uncle. He has a book called Cranky Uncle. He created the Skeptical Science website that has science-based answers to 200 what about questions about science. Do you think that changed his dad's mind? Didn't. His dad's identity, remember we're talking about values here? His dad's values were independence, thrift, and sticking it to the government. So one day, John ran into a rebate for solar panels in the area in Australia where his dad lived. And so he shared it with his dad, not to help his dad take climate action, but to help his dad be more independent, more thrifty, and stick it to the government. And his dad was like, yes, I can do this. So his dad got the solar panels and was more independent and more thrifty every month. You see what's happening here? Those were his dad's values. John helped his dad be an even better version of who he already was. Every month he was sending John the money that he was saving and how well he was doing. And then after about 2 years, John was home having dinner with his dad, and his dad had given him the update on how much money he'd saved. And then in the course of conversation, his dad said to John, oh, global warming, that is such a serious issue, and I've always thought so. John said he almost fell off his chair. He said all the research he'd done had never told him that his dad would actually not only change his mind, but forget that he had done so. But what changed his mind? Values. Taking the values he already had and showing him how climate action was 100% compatible with those values. So now John's dad had to move into a senior's residence, and he was outraged. They were wasting his money by not having solar panels on the roof. So I haven't got an update yet, but he was advocating pretty hard for that senior's residence to get solar panels. So that's the way to do this if you have someone who's dismissive in your life. Now, the first mistake people make, again, is assuming I have to go out and argue with the 11%. No, arguing never changed anybody's mind. The second mistake people make is, I have to scare the pants off people, the starving polar bears, the melting ice sheets. Well, unless you are a polar bear living in the Arctic, this isn't what we need to talk about. We need to talk about what matters, because when climate changes and people get worried and we just share more scary data, people reject it even more and inaction results, because This is a quote by a neuroscientist on how the brain works. Fear and anxiety cause us to withdraw, to freeze, to give up rather than take action. This is how our brain works. So rather than talking about the bad news, we need to talk about farming, like I talk about farming with Jack, who farms cotton in West Texas. We need to talk about our kids, like my colleague Joellen, who has to wake her kids up before dawn in Arizona in the summer because otherwise it's too hot for them to play outside. We have to talk about the smoke that choked the air with the Canadian wildfires back in 2023. We have to talk about the storms that destroyed people's homes along the coast. We have to talk about the floods that have happened. We have to talk about things that matter already to people, already. What type of things can we bond over? The place we live, our families, a shared faith, an activity we enjoy, a shared experience in life. I have started conversations about climate change over the fact that we both enjoy beach vacations, worried about sea level rise. I love chocolate. Cacao prices soared because of shortages due to climate change this last year. I've started conversations over a shared love of knitting. The fact that I'm a mom, that I live in Texas, I'm from Canada. You can start a conversation over almost anything. So remember, what do we have to do? We have to help people connect their head to their heart to their hands. How do we do the hands? We've got the head-heart stuff down, right? People are willing to change if they think what they do will make a difference, and right now, most people don't. 50% of Americans feel hopeless and don't know what to do. So remember the stats. 2/3 are worried, 8% are activated. Most of the people in the middle feel hopeless and don't know what to do. So the Yale researchers who did those maps, they asked people, why are you worried but not activated? And you know what people said? They said, I don't know what to do, and nobody ever asked me to do anything. So what can we do when we use our voices? We can tell people what to do, and we can invite them to do something with us in our communities, which is exactly what you're talking about tonight, right? You can move people from that worried but not activated to activated group just like that. You yourself can do it just like that. So climate changes and we get worried. What do you need to do at this point? Do you need to load up on the polar bear facts? You need to bring in the heart and the hands, how it affects us and what positive solutions look like. People feel empowered and action results because, to go back to the neuroscience, the human brain, and she's not talking about climate change or pollution or biodiversity loss, she's just talking about the brain. The brain is built to associate forward action with a reward, not avoiding harm, so reframe whatever you're talking about so the information you provide induces hope, not dread. Sometimes as a climate scientist who talks about solutions and good news, people accuse me of being a hopium peddler. I am a scientist, so my communication is based on the science. And if this is what the neuroscience says, I'm going to go with it. Otherwise, I'm a science denier. Isn't that interesting? We might accept the physical science of climate change, but we don't accept the science of how the brain works. So, as Greta Thunberg says, the one thing we need more than hope is action. Once we start to act, hope is all around us. When it comes to solutions, there's no one solution that will fix the whole thing, but there's a lot of silver buckshot. There's climate solutions that also give us cleaner air and water, protect us from disasters, improve our health, give us energy that's more affordable, reduce inequalities, create healthy ecosystems and food systems, give us a better future. Who doesn't want that? We often feel like climate action is like this giant boulder sitting there with Greta, she's just a little girl, Sir David Attenborough, he's 95, and he produces a new documentary series every 6 months. Al Gore, he's been doing this for what, 30, 40 years? We feel like they're the only ones trying to push this boulder down the hill. It's never going to work. But when we look around, we realize there are millions of people with their hands on that boulder, and here in this room, we have about 200 of them. And so if we add our hand, it will make a difference. And so I always share stories about what churches are doing, stories about what young evangelicals are doing. Working at the Nature Conservancy, I'm really fortunate because I am loading up on stories. I mean, there are so many stories. I was thinking I should probably just write a book about all the stories I've just learned myself. What are we doing right here? One of the things we're doing is supporting oyster restoration in the Chesapeake. Oysters, a single adult oyster, can filter 50 gallons of water a day. One oyster, this big. Multiply that by 100,000 oysters, the improvement to coastal water is substantial. It provides habitat, it protects shorelines from erosion, it serves as a natural buffer against rising tides and hurricanes. So at the Nature Conservancy, we've supported 125 shellfish farming companies. We have purchased 3.5 million oysters. And we're working in the Chesapeake and around the US. So here in the Chesapeake, the restored reefs have the potential to remove 1 million pounds of nitrogen in a decade. Yes. Isn't that amazing? This is addressing pollution, and it's addressing biodiversity at the same time. This is a map that our scientists made at the Nature Conservancy showing that as the world gets warmer, where are the species going to be migrating? What stands out to you about this map? There is a bottleneck right up the Appalachians. What do species need to migrate? They need connected landscapes to migrate. And so the Nature Conservancy has teamed up with every state along the way from Georgia up to the province of Quebec, with private conservancies, with state and federal lands, to build a resilient and connected network so that as climate changes, species can migrate. And this network also invests in nature that filters pollution, and it also makes them resilient to climate change. It's these win-win-wins. And then, of course, right here in Maryland, you've got climate action in the state, too. Reducing carbon emissions 60% by 2030, net zero emissions by 2045, complementing what the county's doing. So every week I have a newsletter, and I practice this head, heart, hands in my newsletter. The newsletter begins every week with good news about climate solutions in green. Then I have not so good news in red, so people can skip it if they need to, and some weeks you do. It's okay. And I don't talk about the ice sheets or the polar bears. I talk about bananas, sports, senior citizens, energy bills, vulnerability, the impact of climate change on the success rate of in vitro fertilization. I talk about the stress on our bodies. I talk about things that matter to us, and then I always have something you can do. Head, heart, and hands every single week. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that 1.5-degree report that you referenced, it concluded very powerfully, after pages of science, that every action matters, every bit of warming matters, every year matters, every choice matters. Everything we do actually matters. And so I want to conclude with this thought. When the last IPCC report came out, Time magazine asked me to write an essay about it. I was like, oh my gosh, the doorstep of doom just arrived. What am I going to say? So I sat on it for a while. And while I was sitting on it, I went on Instagram where a friend of mine, George, who studies climate communication and wrote a great book called Don't Even Think About It, How Our Brains Are Wired to Ignore Climate Change. On the weekends, George bikes around his little area of England, and he goes to little villages and takes cute little pictures and posts them on Instagram. And George posted a picture on Instagram of a memorial for a member of Parliament who died in the 1800s, whose name I had never heard of. I had never heard of this man. And on his memorial, he said, here lies the body of Sir, let's call him Sir Edgar, don't even remember his name, who was one of the first members of Parliament to write the anti-slavery bill. He advocated and fought for the abolition of slavery for years and for decades. He was defeated. He was reviled. He was beat down. And then just before he died, it passed. It didn't quite say he died a happy man, but it basically implied that. And so that made me realize that the world has changed so radically before. And when it did, it was never because a president or a prime minister or a CEO or a big, rich, famous person decided it had to. We live in the shadow of those people. So change didn't begin with the King of England deciding to end slavery, or the President of the US saying, oh, it's Saturday, maybe we should give women the vote. Or the National Party of South Africa saying, well, it's been long enough, let's just go ahead and end apartheid. That is not how the social change happened. It happened when very ordinary people of no particular power, wealth, or fame decided the world could and should be different. We know a few of their names: William Wilberforce, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela. But what I realized from that picture on Instagram is we do not know the names of the countless others who shared and supported and fought for their vision of a better world. Who were they? They were people who had the courage of their convictions, who used their voices to advocate for the systemic societal changes needed. And this is where the light bulb really went off for me. Those people were us. We people are the ones who changed the world before, and we are the ones who can change it again. And it does not begin with looking at what we eat or what we drive or what we put in the recycling can. It begins with a very simple thing that we are not doing enough of. It begins with what? Talking about it. That is how the world changed before, and that is how it can change again. So I'm going to end, speaking of values, with my favorite Bible verse. It has nothing to do with trees or grass or nature. It has to do with how do we respond. And it says that God has not given us the spirit of fear. What does fear do? Neuroscience tells us that fear paralyzes us. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, which means if you are empowered, what can you do? You can act. So we have the ability to act out of love, which means we're considering others above ourselves, and, my favorite, with a sound mind, which means we can use the information science gives us to make good decisions. We can act without fear, but with power, love, and a sound mind to change the world. So if that's the case, my only question left is, what are we waiting for? Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for that kind applause. I am going to, with your assistance, do a very quick speed round of 5 minutes of questions. Is that okay if I do that? Okay. Now, it's not too late. Unfortunately, I'll just put it right here. Actually, you know what? I'll go to here. If you want the newsletter, you can sign up. But you can see the questions on your phone. You've been helping out. We have a bunch of upvoted questions, and this is awesome. So here we go. Ready? What uncommon climate technology or strategy gives you hope? I love my newsletter because every week I get to tell fun stories, like how farmers are actually growing plants in mineral-rich soil so you don't have to dig mines to get rare earth minerals. I'm like, whoa, that is fascinating. Or, I love what we do at the Nature Conservancy, helping poor countries with a national debt at an interest rate of 22% refinance their debt for 11% interest as long as they use half the money they save to invest in nature and climate resilience. Or developing insurance for coral reefs. Or figuring out that food waste is a huge source of our personal emissions, and when we just change how we shop, we can make a huge dent in our footprint and that of everybody we know. Every week I share amazing things that surprise me and encourage me. The most effective way to reach faith communities that are suspicious of or resistant to climate change is to bring the latest volumes of the IPCC report and drop them on their toes. No, that is not the most effective way. You know, what's the most effective way? You have to start with the heart. What do they already care about? You have to connect the dots to why this matters. You have to, remember John's dad, you have to begin with what they already care about, connect the dots to why it matters, and then you can't stop there. What do you have to do? You have to offer practical solutions, because what ultimately changes people's minds is knowing that they can make a difference. How to work in climate for young professionals. People often say, what should I study? And I do work at a university. And my answer is, you should study whatever you love, whatever you're passionate about, because every day I work with people who have degrees in marketing and public relations. I work with people who have degrees in business and law. I work with people who have degrees in international relations and architecture. I work with people who have medical degrees. I work with artists. And yes, of course, I also work with scientists. So whatever your passion is, we need you. We can't do it alone. And if your place of work is not talking about it, you know what to do. Figure out what they care about and help them connect what they already care about to this issue, and bring in positive solutions of what another organization like them is doing. What a school like yours is doing that you could do. What a church like yours is doing that you could do. What a place of work like yours is doing that you could do. Where to begin? Where to begin? If people are mired in doom and gloom, they're going to be paralyzed and they're not going to do anything. So the best place to start is by doing something, anything, and then talking about it. Literally. And then, this is a really good question, we have to make sure the solutions are win-win solutions. So for example, if in Virginia, the biggest source of deforestation in Virginia is what? Solar panel farms. Yeah, that's not good. So at the Nature Conservancy, we actually created a map of the whole US showing that we have more than enough space to put all the wind and solar we need without interfering with migratory pathways of birds, without interfering with bat populations, without interfering with valuable agricultural land unless you want to do agrivoltaics. We don't need the roadsides for anything else. We can just put solar there and then put pollinator-friendly plants under them. So we need to make sure that when we're implementing solutions, they are win-win-win solutions. They're not just a solution for one thing, making them worse. And then somebody has said, which source of energy is most effective? There's no silver bullet. There's a lot of silver buckshot. We have wind, we have solar, we have geothermal, we have hydro, we have storage. But you know what we also have? We also have efficiency. We waste 2/3 of the energy we produce. Through efficiency alone, the US could meet its climate targets, 50% of its climate targets. So why is this so great? Well, in my newsletter, I have new good news every single week. Electric cargo ships, how to get rid of plastic, what we can do, books we can read with our kids, things we can do to spend time outside in nature, conversations we can have with people. But it all begins with what? What is the first thing that every single one of us can do? We can talk about it. So that's what I want you to remember. And if you don't know what to talk about, I have an easy way for you to figure that out. Every single week, I've got different talking points. But now you're going to go into groups, and you are going to talk about it, right? That's what's coming next. So you want to tell people what they're doing next? Oh, there we go. Come on up.
Wow. I don't know about you, I needed that dose of hopium tonight. Please join me in an extra big thank you to Dr. Katharine Hayhoe and Tim Lattimer. Thank you both. My name's Mark Wright. I'm chair of the IPC board. And I know that you have been sitting for a long time. And I'm what's standing between you and freedom. So before you jump up and go out to your breakout sessions down the hall, we do want to conclude tonight with something very special and very important. So I'll just ask for a few more minutes of your patience and attention. As most of you know, moving IPC's work forward takes a huge team effort. It takes the staff, it takes board members, it takes partner congregations, many allies around the region, and each of you, of course. It takes dedication, enthusiasm, wisdom, a generous spirit, and deep personal investment. Thankfully, we have an inspiring model among us who shows what that sort of devotion looks like. It's a man named Charlie Conklin. Charlie has a heart as big as the Chesapeake itself. He has always believed that caring for creation is a moral and spiritual responsibility. That's why he joined with some like-minded souls back in 2010 to form an organization called the Chesapeake Covenant Community. In 2013, Charlie helped lead the transformation of the CCC into IPC, Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake. He and his fellow founding board members, some of whom are here tonight, made that change to reflect the diversity of faith communities all around the Chesapeake. Year after year, Charlie has gone out of his way to help IPC grow its roots in the fertile soil of faith and grow its branches out to touch people across many religions around the region. He set a high bar for every IPC leader. In fact, I've been told that long before DEI, Charlie was known for saying, "Women leaders will save the world." Charlie, ever since you helped form IPC years ago, our staff, board, and other leaders have worked hard to follow your example. For your many years of selfless service, we are honored and grateful to have this opportunity tonight to present you with the IPC Founder and Vision Award. This award was first presented to Jody Rose last year as she ended her nearly 11 years of dedicated service as IPC's executive director. So Charlie, you are only the second person to ever receive this award in IPC's history. That's a special thing. I'd like to invite you up on stage for just a moment to accept a token of our appreciation, which we hope will grace your favorite wall at home. And I have a couple of helpers. Thank you. You got to turn around. We're going to take his picture just for a quick second. There we go.
Yeah, that's better.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm just going to say.
Just say thank you, all right. You just got a minute.
Just 1 minute, but I am so impressed with what IPC is doing. And it's because of all the people that are around the room. It's wonderful. And so thank you. And you know what this does? This keeps me growing because I'm an old fart. But guess what? I'm still trying to make people love each other. That's the most important thing we can do. So thank you, Ernie.
Thank you. Be careful. You don't want to fall off over here. I might anyway. Charlie, as heartfelt as this award is, I think the greatest gift that we can give to you is a pledge like this one to continue the inspiring work that you helped start. There's a stack of these pledge cards out on a table in the foyer, and I would like each of you, as you go out there in just a minute, to grab one of these pledge cards, fill it out, return it to IPC staff tonight, or drop it in the mail when you get home, whatever works. You'll notice that the card is not only asking for your commitment to support IPC financially, many of you already are, and we are deeply appreciative of your donations. It's also asking you to consider doing a few other things: attending a future event, signing up to be a volunteer, learning more about IPC's endowment, or writing a blog post and sending along photos about the work that your congregation is doing so that IPC can share your story more broadly. If you feel called to do all of those things, I'd like to talk to you afterwards about joining our advisory council or board. So as Bonnie Sorak from IPC staff comes in my direction, let me just thank each of you for being here tonight and for the work that you do to help heal this special corner of creation. Thank you very much.